Okay, picture this. A bank older than the United States. Older than the French Revolution. A bank that financed wars, funded railroads, once literally helped bail out a king. Gone. In 24 hours. And the person who did it wasn't a hacker, wasn't a spy. He was 28 years old, sitting alone in an office in Singapore. So here's the thing about Barings Bank. Founded in 1762. 233 years old by the time this story ends. We're talking about the bank that funded the Louisiana Purchase, that bankrolled British trade routes across half the planet, that Queen Elizabeth herself banked with. Historians used to joke there were 6 great powers in Europe: England, France, Prussia, Austria, Russia, and Barings. If you wanted proof that an institution could survive literally anything, wars, depressions, empires rising and falling, Barings was it. This wasn't some scrappy startup bank. This was old money. Old, careful, conservative money, run by people who genuinely believed nothing could touch them. And that's exactly why this story matters to you, even if you've never bought a single stock in your life. Because the thing that took Barings down wasn't a war. It wasn't a recession. It wasn't some outside force nobody could have predicted. It was one guy, a bit too much trust, and a number nobody was watching closely enough. Stick with me, because the way this unravels is honestly kind of insane. His name was Nick Leeson. Grew up outside London, no fancy pedigree, no Oxford degree, which, in the buttoned-up world of British banking in the 1980s, actually made him kind of an outsider. But he was sharp with numbers, ambitious, and hungry to prove himself. He worked his way up fast. By the time he was sent to Singapore in the early 90s to run derivatives trading for Barings, he was still in his 20s, running an entire office almost single-handedly. And here's the part that still gets me when I read about it. He was in charge of both the trading desk and the settlement desk. The guy placing the bets and the guy checking whether the bets were reported honestly. Same person. Nobody at head office in London seemed to think that was a problem. Now, at first, Leeson was making money. Or at least it looked that way. He was trading futures contracts tied to the Nikkei, basically betting on the direction of the Japanese stock market. And when a small trade went wrong early on, a mistake made by a junior employee under him, instead of reporting the loss, he did something quiet. He opened an error account, numbered 88888, supposedly meant to catch tiny clerical mistakes, the kind of account nobody ever really audits closely, and he started parking his losses there instead. Here's the open loop, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. That account wasn't supposed to exist in any real reporting sense. It was meant for pennies, not millions. Leeson used it to hide a growing hole. And the wild part? For a while it worked. He kept trading, kept trying to trade his way back to even, and the number in that hidden account kept climbing. Not by thousands, eventually by hundreds of millions. And every time it grew, the pressure to fix it quietly, without anyone finding out, grew right alongside it. London kept sending him more money. Why wouldn't they? On paper, their star trader in Singapore was producing profits that made up a huge chunk of the bank's total earnings that year. Auditors flew out, glanced at the books, and flew back satisfied. Colleagues in London reportedly nicknamed him a genius. He even got a bonus that year worth more than most people make in a decade. Nobody in London wanted to ask too many questions about a golden goose. And then, foreshadowing you didn't know you needed, in January 1995, something happened that had nothing to do with Leeson at all. An earthquake hit Kobe, Japan, killed thousands of people, leveled entire neighborhoods, and it sent Asian markets into a violent, unpredictable swing that nobody could have timed. Leeson had bet, heavily, that the Nikkei would stay stable. It didn't. It cratered. And now the hole in account 88888 wasn't growing slowly anymore. It was growing by tens of millions of dollars a day. So what does someone do when they're already this deep? He doubled down. He kept buying, betting the market would bounce back and cover everything at once. It didn't bounce back. It kept falling. And here's the detail that always gets me. He was placing these trades essentially alone, barely supervised, while the number in that account quietly became one of the largest single trading losses in banking history. A number so big that when it finally came out, people at head office genuinely thought it had to be a typo. By late February, the losses had passed £800 million. More than the entire capital of the bank. More than Barings was worth, full stop. Leeson fled Singapore with his wife, leaving behind a note with a single word on it: sorry. He was eventually caught at an airport in Frankfurt trying to make his way home, and extradited back to Singapore to face trial, where he'd eventually be sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. And back in London, executives were doing math they never thought they'd have to do. Not, how do we fix this? Just, is there anything left? They called around. They tried to find a buyer overnight, quietly, before the news broke and made things even worse. Nobody wanted to touch it. There wasn't anything left. On February 26, 1995, Barings Bank, 233 years old, was declared insolvent. It was sold. Not for millions, not even close. It was sold to a Dutch bank, ING, for £1. £1. For a bank that had survived Napoleon, 2 world wars, and the Great Depression. 233 years of history, changing hands for less than the price of a coffee. You ever notice how that pattern shows up in way smaller ways? Not moving a mutual fund because you don't want to see the loss confirmed. Not opening the banking app after a bad month. Not telling your partner about a purchase you're embarrassed by. The instinct isn't that different. It's just that Leeson had a Bloomberg terminal instead of a phone screen, and 200 years of history riding on the outcome instead of a single paycheck. That's the part modern markets never really fixed either. We've got better oversight now, sure. Regulations, checks, separated roles so one person can't do what Leeson did. But the psychology, the urge to hide a mistake and hope the market fixes it for you before anyone finds out, that's not a 1995 problem. That's a human problem. It shows up in day traders refusing to sell at a loss. It shows up in companies burying bad numbers in a footnote. It's the same instinct, just wearing different clothes. So yeah, 233 years, undone by one hidden account and one very bad week in the markets. Makes you think differently about the phrase, too big to fail, doesn't it? Because Barings wasn't too big. It just never checked its own math, and nobody made it. If you want to see what happens when an entire country stops checking its math, I've got a video queued up on the collapse that nearly took down the whole global financial system in 2008. That one's even bigger. I'll see you there.